Hi everyone, I'm Lewis, the CEO and co-founder of ESPROFILER. Today I'm really excited to announce something that we've been relentlessly working on in the background called agent tasks. And this is part of our whole revamp around our new agentic core that we've introduced into ESPROFILER. We built this to save security leaders and architects massive amounts of time, especially around tasks such as security consolidation, finding overlap, finding gaps, and even things like strategic replacement, taking new vendors and replacing existing incumbents in the portfolio. So let me set the scene for this. We can now come into an organization, we can take an export of things like purchase requests and asset informations, throw that into ESPROFILER, and our intelligence will rip through it to figure out actually what the organization has. This is a huge data cleanup exercise. Solving problems like legacy entries in asset inventories, duplication, things like that. The value of this is absolutely massive because you get a picture across the entire organization. It doesn't matter what department purchased it. If it relates to security capabilities, we'll pick that up. And a good example of this is things like application development teams buying products like GitLab that already contain SaaS DaaS capabilities, and even application monitoring teams who are buying things like Splunk for application monitoring that the security team might not even be aware of. This is a massive part of the dog work involved in any security consolidation efforts, strategic replacements, identifying waste. You've got to know and have a good picture of what capabilities the organization has as a whole, not just what the security teams are buying. And this is what phase one unlocks. The discovery gives you that live portfolio, which is what we're currently looking at right now. So let me show you how easy this is. I can now click on portfolio tasks and I get three options. We can assign tasks to users, we can assign tasks to vendors through our vendor portal, and we can now assign tasks to agents. So let's click on this. So what I can do from here is I can click new task, and I'm presented with a catalog of pre-curated objectives that we can then run on our portfolio. We have three currently, and this is an expanding list, and you can also define your own with general tasks. So if I click on something like strategic consolidation, this is where we're looking to take a vendor. Maybe we're in conversations with a potential vendor as part of a cost saving or a consolidation play. I can click select vendor. I can search for a specific vendor. This is connected to our capability exchange network that's tracking the whole market of vendors and products. I can click my vendor, click confirm, and this will now go away and take the entire portfolio of the vendor that I selected, all of the products that they currently have, all of the features, the use cases, the capabilities, and the real depth of data that we actively track on that vendor. It will then look at every single vendor and product that's currently in your portfolio and start to look at all of the context around business justifications, start dates, end dates, all of that data that we currently then hold inside of ESPROFILER, and start to calculate and work out where opportunities exist for replacement. Now in the background, that agent's going to work on that task. It's going to take all of that data that exists inside the portfolio, all of the rationale as why the business purchased it, and start to analyze where overlap might exist. And if you think about this, this is a huge amount of dog work that someone has to do. You have to understand every single one of these technologies, read into it, understand what it's doing, to then come up with a conclusion of where overlap or where to even begin. So this is the massive time save that this is doing in the background. So whilst that's working, it's definitely worth touching on the journey that we've been on to actually get here. Prior to this, we developed an insanely detailed taxonomy tree. We had things like NIST, the categories, the domains, we had MITRE TTPs, and a bunch of other things that we turned into what we called a trait system. And we would then score and weight that trait system to try and detect overlap that went across capability, functionality, taxonomy, things like that. And it just created a really rubbish experience. What we found was, as soon as you start to look at how nuanced security is and take technologies such as A good example being like enterprise browsers. You've got to really understand what that technology does, what it's trying to achieve, to then figure out how it could actually displace other technologies inside the stack. So things like DLP, proxies, SASE, all of these things are potential candidates that that technology could replace that often sit in completely different taxonomy trees, in different categories and things like that. So whilst that approach gave us some results, we just found the overall experience was poor. And this is where the real difference of using agents to do this has come in, because now we can take all of that data that we were previously taking and an understanding of what that technology is, and then go down a reasoning journey to figure out whether those two things overlap. And this also opens the door to bringing then in the customer context to make this really come alive. That report's finished. If we click and open that, we can see immediately what we get. And you can see that we're pulling together all of the cost information that we'll have picked up during the discovery phase. And we've also then aligned all of that to the product. So immediately what we can see is the agents detected where overlap exists. It gives you a confidence rating on how confident it is those technologies could be replaced. So this is just kind of a guiding steer as to how well those technologies align that have been identified. It tells you how many consolidation opportunities exist in the portfolio, and also takes into consideration the cost of that. So you can see what the opportunity cost. So immediately you've already done a huge amount of legwork, taking that entire portfolio, doing all of the discovery to get to this point, and then we're taking that a step further by also showing you a decision time frame. So you can see here we can see how many products are actually in that decision time frame, and the decision dates of around when we actually need to action that decision to replace that technology. To pull this together, we're taking all of the commercial information that exists. So whether there's like several different contracts that are behind those technologies, we're figuring out what the last contract date is, and then also overlaying something that we call a replacement time frame. So all of that information can be added in from the customer context to then figure out, okay, well, what exists that could be replaced, and when is the decision time frame that we have to make that decision for the replacement. Now, if I click on one of those replacement candidates that's been highlighted by the platform, we can dive into that. We get immediately an overview of why those two technologies overlap, a set of simple key takeaways in a summary. We also get information on the left about the product that's been identified in the vendor's portfolio and the product that's been identified in our portfolio, and how those two things relate. Now, if I scroll down, we can also start to normalize what those two technologies' feature sets are. So it doesn't matter if one vendor's described it in one way and another vendor's described it another way. We'll try and do the legwork to marry those up and provide a comparison table. So that just gives you a simple overview of why that exists. And then if we want to, we can drive into the capabilities and then start to understand that against any of the frameworks that we have selected. So in this example, we're looking at MITRE ATT&CK. We're able to see how those capabilities compare across those products. We're also able to do something like a what-if analysis to see what happens if we remove one of those. And I can also switch over to something like the traditional matrix view. So if I do that, I'm able to then see where the coverage actually exists for those two products. And this is really where the level of depth of data that we have shines through. So if I click on this technique here, switch over to capabilities, you can see the level of detail that we actually go to is like nothing else that exists in the market. So we're able to go into understanding what are the features of those products and how do those features come together to provide that security capability. So hopefully this gives a picture of all of the effort that's actually in the hood. So just to recap, what we actually do is take that data that's usually not in a great state, asset data, purchase data, use it to discover what exists across the whole organization to build that live portfolio of what the organization actually has. An agent tasks brings all that together to let us basically perform functions that would normally take architects and leaders huge amounts of time just to get to that point. This means you've got more time to actually focus on the strategy and the implementation of these changes. We're super excited about all of the work that we put into this and the roadmap of what's in front of us. Thanks for listening.